Right, so Italy has just gone and done what politicians across Europe swear could never happen, mainly because the thought of it terrifies all of them. It shut itself down for Gaza. The entire country. Not for wages, not for fuel, not for pensions, but for Gaza. Trains slowed, buses vanished, schools closed, ports that feed NATO's arteries stood empty because dockers and teachers and transport workers decided they'd rather paralyse their own economy than keep fueling Israel's war, their genocide. What was the reaction from their hard right leader, Giorgia Meloni? She called them hooligans, as if the crime here is refusing to load crates of death onto ships. The sickness of such a stance is breathtaking. Starving children is apparently less offensive to this government than dockers with a conscience are. What Italy just proved is simple. When a state won't act, its people can. It is amongst ordinary working class people where all the real power of a nation lies, after all. And in Meloni's Italy, the question is no longer whether workers can shut the country down, but how many times they're willing to do it before their rancid government starts listening. Right, so it's not every day that a European country grinds to a halt over a war being waged thousands of miles away, is it? Even if it is a genocide. Yet in Italy, that's exactly what happened yesterday. For 24 hours the trains slowed, the buses stopped running, the schools closed, the universities locked their doors. The great ports of Genoa and Livorno and Ravenna, gateways to the Mediterranean and to NATO's supply chains, stood still. Tens of thousands filled the streets of Rome, Milan, Turin, Florence, Naples, Palermo, waving flags and chanting slogans not for wages or pensions, not for fuel subsidies or tax cuts, but for Gaza. 75 Italian cities shut down. The general strike of September 2025 was not about Italians' own material conditions. It was about refusing to be complicit in the starvation of children, the bombing of hospitals, the flattening of homes, and the eradication of an entire society. The sheer audacity of this deserves to be lingered upon. Italy has a long and proud tradition of strikes. Its labour movement has fought over wages, hours, and contracts for more than a century. It's mobilised against austerity and privatisation, against bosses and bankers. But this strike was different. It was a strike against complicity, a strike that declared, we will not be the hands that load the weapons that kill Palestinian children. We will not move the cargo that supplies a war machine. We will not stand by as our government does nothing while Gaza is burned and starved. That is what shook Giorgia Meloni's right-wing administration, and that is what rattled Israel itself. But it's Meloni's reaction that has been the most disgusting part. The government's excuse was that the real danger wasn't the bombs falling on Gaza, you see, but the dockers in Ravenna who refused to load them. Only in the warped mirror of politics does refusing to kill count as extremism, while aiding a war machine is presented as normal, but then it is a very right-wing administration. The strike did not emerge out of nowhere. It's been the culmination of months of smaller, localised actions that gathered momentum and built into something national. It began, as so often in Italy, in the ports. Dock workers in Genoa had refused to handle cargo they suspected of carrying arms bound for Israel, echoing the stance their predecessors had taken in the 1980s when they refused to move shipments for apartheid South Africa. Livorno and Ravenna followed suit. At Ravenna, dockers physically blocked trucks at the gates, insisting their labour would not be used to send weapons into a war zone where civilians were being slaughtered, and the local governmental administration backed them up. This was a massive moral spark. It caught fire rather quickly, too. Students began staging sit-ins across universities, demanding that Italy join the likes of Spain and Ireland, and of course the likes of UK and Belgium since, and more, in recognising Palestine. Transport workers joined in, disrupting buses and metro services. Teachers walked out. It was in this atmosphere that the grassroots unions joined in. The USB, the CUB, the SGB, the ADL. They all declared enough was enough. And they announced a 24-hour general strike. By the 22nd of September, Italy really did grind to a halt. From Milan to Palermo, life was disrupted. Protests filled the streets. For those outside Italy, the message was rather stark. But this was not a symbolic protest at all. This was an entire country standing up and saying they are refusing to be made complicit in a genocide. Food for thought, isn't it? The demands of the strike were as clear as they were uncompromising, though. First, halt all arms shipments and military logistics to Israel. Ports like Genoa and Livorno are critical nodes not just for commercial shipping, but for NATO and defence contractors. Each container of arms loaded, each shipment passed, was direct material support for the genocide in Gaza. For dockers, that meant blood on their hands, so they drew a line. No more. Second, they demanded that a recognition of the state of Palestine. Recognition had once been framed as a radical demand, of course. Not anymore, it's not. In the space of a week, France, Portugal, the UK, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, Monaco and Andorra have all formally recognised Palestine. According to tallies, 156 UN member states now do so. Italy's refusal to join this wave ends up looking like a moral and diplomatic disgrace. Third, provide real humanitarian relief. No more excuses about complex access issues. No more mealy-mouthed phrases about both sides. Workers wanted their government to demand open corridors for food, fuel and medicine. They wanted Italy to fund aid through the UN and other agencies, not block or starve them. And beyond these explicit demands, there was a broader moral one, to expose the complicity of the Italian state and to force a reckoning with its role in the war economy. But why does this strike matter beyond Italy, though? Because of logistics. First and foremost, Italy is not a minor statelet. Its ports are Mediterranean arteries through which enormous amounts of trade, energy and military supplies flow. Genoa links northern Europe to the Suez Canal, Livorno and Ravenna, and they're all NATO hubs, aren't they? If these ports close, shipments are rerouted, delayed, exposed. For Israel, that means very few, if any, future shipping options. Even temporary blockages create headaches for military planners and shipping companies, and given how much by way of arms Israel gets through, that probably goes double for them, doesn't it? That's why this strike mattered. It was not symbolic protest, it was economic leverage. It was real pressure on Israel's war machine and a warning to Meloni to listen to the people or face more of this. But it also mattered because it shattered the illusion of consensus. Israel and its allies prefer to present Europe as united, silent, locked into supporting Tel Aviv no matter the cost. They dismiss critics as fringe, as radicals, as marginal. Yet when tens of thousands walk out across large European economy and bring it to its knees, that facade cracks, falls apart. Even Israeli outlets hostile to the strike admitted the scale of it, calling it chaos but conceding the numbers that were in the streets. When even opponents cannot deny it, then the illusion's gone. And third, it mattered because it lit a fuse. Other countries are watching. The obvious question some media were asking was whether this model can now spread to other countries, especially those who have militant dock workers and histories of solidarity strikes. Italy has set an example, therefore. If workers in one major European economy can shut down arm flows to Israel, what stops others from following? And this is the context in which Giorgia Meloni finds herself trapped in. On paper, she's a sovereigntist, a nationalist who boasts of defending Italy's independence from Brussels and Berlin. But in practice, she's an Atlanticist, loyal to Washington and to NATO. And that leaves her boxed in. She can't easily pivot against Israel without risking a coalition, her hard-right base, and her relations with the United States. Yet she also cannot ignore the scale of this strike without looking weak, irrelevant, and out of touch with her own people. Her immediate reaction reveals the trap she's in. She condemned the protesters, not Israel. She called them pseudo-protesters, hooligans and radicals. She accused Antifa groups of hijacking the marches. But if you're against Antifa, that makes you a fascist by default, doesn't it? Something Donald Trump probably hasn't realised yet as he brands Antifa a terrorist entity in the States. She painted the strike as violence and disruption, but in the same breath she shifted her rhetoric on Israel too. She condemned certain Israeli strikes as going beyond the principle of proportionality. She called the killing of journalists unjustifiable. These are not trivial statements. They mark a rhetorical concession, an acknowledgement that even she cannot defend everything Israel is doing. Yet they are still not policy changes. They are not halts to arms shipments. They are not recognition of Palestine. They are words, not deeds. And here lies the crucial point. Rhetoric cannot satisfy a movement demanding action. The unions have said it plainly. They will continue until Italy is no longer complicit. This is not the language of a movement that can be bought off with speeches. Meloni's condemnation of proportionality may impress Brussels bureaucrats, but it does nothing for dockers staring at crates marked for Israel. For them it is very simple. Either the shipments stop or the strikes repeat. And what happens if nothing changes? Then this happens again and again and again. This was not a one-off, this was a test run. Without concessions, unions will escalate to rolling strikes, targeted blockades, repeated walkouts. Ports are a pressure point where a few hundred workers can block entire shipments. The economic leverage people have is immense, and the same is true in every country. And the reputational damage is growing too. The images of tens of thousands in the streets of Milan or Rome, of ports standing empty, of students marching with Palestinian flags, have already spread worldwide. If Meloni refuses to shift, she faces not just disruption, but international embarrassment. So the only question is how far this goes, and what breaks first? Israel's impunity, Meloni's coalition, or the patience of workers ready to walk out again and again? And this brings us to the wider European picture. Recognition of Palestine is no longer fringe, it is mainstream. In a matter of days, France, Portugal, the UK, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, Monaco, and Andorra all recognise Palestine. 156 UN states now stand for it. Italy's absence is glaring, therefore. For a country that likes to style itself as central to European identity, to be left behind in this, as even conservative governments move towards recognition, is humiliating. Workers know this, students know this, unions know this. That is why recognition has become a central demand of the strike, because it is now the baseline. And there is more depth still. These strikes fit into a longer tradition. Genoa dockers refusing to load arms for apartheid, workers boycotting shipments during NATO interventions, the anti-fascist strikes of the Second World War. Italy has a memory of resistance. That is why this strike resonates. What does it tell us about Meloni's sovereigntism? That it's a sham. A government that claims sovereignty yet obeys Washington and Tel Aviv isn't sovereign at all, it's dependent. The strike exposes the contradiction here. Italy's people demand independence of action, but Meloni delivers servility. How does Italy's hesitation compare to the European tide? It leaves Rome isolated, out of step, an outlier. Spain and Ireland recognised Palestine months ago. France and Portugal joined last week. Even Britain under Keir Starmer has recognised Palestine. Italy clings to silence. That's not strength, that's weakness. Why is recognition of Palestine now the baseline? Because Gaza has shifted the window. The sheer horror of famine, bombing, displacement has made neutrality impossible. Recognition is no longer radical, it's minimum decency. That is why Italy's refusal looks obscene. What role does public opinion play? Enormous. Polls show Italian youth overwhelmingly sympathetic to Palestinians. The mobilisation of students, unions, civil society reflects that. Meloni may have parliamentary majorities, but she faces a generational moral revolt. And what of Israel's reaction? Officially silence. No grand denunciations of Italy's strike have been made by Netanyahu's government, at least not at time of writing. Perhaps because Israel knows drawing attention to it only amplifies it, not that has necessarily stopped them before. Perhaps because it fears the precedent spreading further to other nations. Silence can be rather revealing too, especially theirs. Could Italy's strike spread elsewhere? Absolutely. Belgian dockers have a long tradition of solidarity actions. Spanish unions are militant. Greek workers have already joined flotilla solidarity actions. Italy may be the first, but it might not be the last. And finally, what happens if the strikes succeed? If Meloni caves, if arms shipments are halted, if Palestine is recognised, if Italy joins the European wave, then we reach a tipping point. A significant economy and logistics hub imposing an arms embargo and recognising Palestine would force Brussels to confront the issue bloc-wide. It would embolden unions across Europe. It would transform the politics of the continent. The strike then is not just about Gaza, it's about Italy. It's about Europe. It's about the future of sovereignty and complicity. It's about whether governments can continue to defy their people in the name of alliances, or whether people can drag governments back to morality, even ones as right-wing as Italy's. So the conclusion is surely inescapable. Italy's general strike for Gaza is a line in the sand. It said this country will not be silent, this labour movement will not be complicit, this government will not be allowed to pretend neutrality as it fuels a genocide. Meloni can sneer at hooligans, she can condemn property damage, she can mutter about proportionality, but unless she halts the shipments, unless she recognises Palestine, unless she breaks with Israel's impunity, she will face more strikes, more blockades, more revolt. Europe is shifting. Recognition is spreading like wildfire right now. Workers are rising. The only mystery is how long Meloni can hold out and whether it is her coalition, Israel's impunity, or Italy's patience that collapses first. History is on the side of the dockers, not with the ships of genocide. Italy is not the only country having said no to Israel this week either. So have Saudi Arabia, as it happens, and their refusal might come with a nuclear option. Literally a nuclear option. So to get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here is your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and help support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.